The Gospel according to Luke is a curious book, at times deeply comforting, and on other occasions really disturbing. Like a West End musical, his Gospel begins with two banging hits, the Magnificat and the Benedictus, in which we hear that the lowly will be lifted up, the hungry filled with good things, and how in the tender compassion of our God, the dawn from on high shall break upon us to shine on those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. Luke tells us of strangers, foreigners, outcasts who were made welcome, tax collectors and sinners who were invited to the feast. He tells us that when we are still far off, God comes running to us, flings his arms around us and brings us home. Luke's gospel really does feel like gospel, like good news. But there are parts of his gospel, sections he has chosen to include, that are challenging, unsettling, disturbing to read. In Luke's version of the Beatitudes, he includes a list of anti-beatitudes too. Woe, he says, bad luck, he says, to you who are rich, to you who are full now, to you who are laughing now, to you when all speak well of you. You may think you're blessed, but you're not. In Luke's gospel, Jesus has a real go at the religious leaders, using the word woe again. He cursed them. But woe to you Pharisees for neglecting justice and the love of God. He criticized them for taking the seats of honor, for being greeted with respect in the marketplace, for loading people with burdens hard to bear and failing to lift a finger to ease them. And it is in Luke's gospel that Jesus says, "Do you think that I've come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division." These are hard, uncomfortable, unsettling things. And today's excerpt from Luke's Gospel is in the same uncompromising vein. It's a tough one. Luke says that when Jesus looked round and saw large crowds following him, he turned to them and said, "These are the entry requirements. These are the rules. You have to hate your family. You have to carry your cross. You have to give up all your possessions. And then, and only then, can you come and follow me." Jesus never said that, like those consumer surveys you get, we could assign to him a level of commitment between 1 and 5, or show by ticking boxes the effort that we're willing to put into following him. He said you have to hate your family. You have to carry your cross. You have to give up all your possessions. Now, when he said you have to hate your family, what did he mean? After all, this is the church, and we are supposed to support the family. Well, Matthew in his gospel has Jesus saying that we must love him more than we love our family. Well, that's all right, kind of. We can accept that. Except Luke's gospel has Jesus say hate, not love less. So what does he mean? I think there are a couple of parts to this. Firstly, if you say you hate someone, then you're not bound by them. You are a free agent. You can do what you like. Jesus was talking about a freedom from all that ties people down, because the time may come when you have to choose between the love of your family and your devotion to God. Remember the context in which Jesus says this. The 5 chapters leading up to this, in Luke's gospel, Jesus had been heading resolutely for Jerusalem, knowing that when he gets there, he will die. In chapter 14, the shadow of the cross is looming large, and so what Jesus says about commitment and about following him has to take into account what he himself will go through when he gets to Jerusalem. Later on, when Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane, he has to prepare himself for his death, and that means saying goodbye. Saying goodbye to his mother, to his brothers and sisters, to his friends, to all whom he loves. He could not allow his love for them and his desire to be with them to prevent him from doing what he needed to do. Now, that isn't hatred in a sort of violent sense, but it is a kind of detachment, a loosening of all that bound him to those whom he loved. The other way of looking at this hard statement is to think back to your adolescence. Angry teenagers will sometimes say to their parents that they hate them. Now, they may be frustrated, furious even, but is it really hatred? Often I think it is more about saying that they are their own person, that they believe only what they believe, that they will associate with whom they will associate, that they will do what they want to do. And it may be that Christians are called sometimes to stand up against the values or beliefs of their family, not hating them as such, but stepping out on their own, being their own person, having integrity. It might be that the Christian refuses to participate in the kind of enmity that often exists within or between families, or that they advocate forgiveness when others are crying out for revenge, or that they continue to love those who have blown their final chance. For some Christians, even today, choosing to follow Jesus means cutting themselves off from their family. At the Lambeth conference, I was talking to a bishop in Pakistan, where a young person converting from Islam to Christianity is not only ostracized by their family, but often threatened and sometimes killed. Similar challenges face Christians in Burma, China, Eritrea, India, Iran, Nigeria, North Korea, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Vietnam. Choosing to follow Jesus there means sometimes having to be ready to sever family ties. Now that's tough. But what about here? I mean, that is not our reality as such. Maybe there is something here, though, about enlarging your sense of what the family is. You see, there is a bias, an inclination in us to help those to whom we feel a sense of attachment. Charity, we say, begins at home. I'd do anything for my family. But what about those who are not like you? Luke has a real thing about this. Jesus said you have to love your neighbour, but in those days, when he said that, you could define who your neighbour was. Perhaps they were just close family or a member of your household. Certainly for the Jew, it would not extend beyond fellow Jews. But Luke records a story Jesus told of a Samaritan coming to the aid of a Jew. He blew apart this nonsense about charity beginning at home and said, no, your family is more than father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. You are part of something bigger. And your love and care and capacity to sacrifice yourself for others has to extend way beyond your kinship group. The church that emerged 2,000 years ago reached out in love to those who were not like themselves. And that outreach is in our DNA. It is what led to the advent of hospitals, hospices, almshouses, schools, food banks. It is what we do because we have a bigger view of what family is. Jesus said you have to hate your family. He also said you have to carry your cross, which we take to be a metaphor for having to do certain things that we may not enjoy, like caring for the elderly relatives or cleaning the church brass. When Jesus said you have to carry your cross, he was not talking in metaphors. Think of those who followed him. Peter, whose commitment was at one point shaky, was nailed to an upside-down cross. Andrew was stretched out on an X-shaped cross. Stephen was stoned to death. James the Great was killed by Herod. James the Less was another to be stoned to death. Countless others were tortured, imprisoned, and killed because they were followers of Jesus Christ. That was the kind of commitment that Jesus called for. To take up one's cross means to make a voluntary decision to accept God's will, even when it goes against our own wishes and even when it results in pain and suffering. Taking up our cross means accepting the will of God, even when it runs counter to our own will. If I had not taken up my cross, then I'd probably be working in science or industry or commerce. I'd have more money, more possessions, an easier life and weekends off. I'd also probably be thoroughly miserable. This is about self-denial, a very alien concept in 21st century Western world. Tom Wright says, following Jesus means denying yourself, saying no to the things that you imagine make up yourself, and finding to your astonishment that the self you get back is more glorious, more joyful than you could have imagined. That's how the kingdom arrived, through Jesus' achievement. That's how it spreads today. And he concludes, all the trade routes of Christian theology and discipleship pass through this point. Taking up your cross and self-denial are not the advanced disciplines of the super-religious. They are at the heart of what it means for all of us to follow Jesus. All the trade routes of Christian theology and discipleship, everything we know about God and what it means to follow him, pass through this point. As Christians, as followers of Jesus, we do what we do because we have given ourselves unreservedly to God, or to misquote the West Wing, because we serve at the pleasure of our God. We may start small, seeking in new ways to live more for God, to give more of ourselves to him, but that generosity of spirit will grow, inspired by the Spirit, until we are able, as St. Paul says, to present the whole of ourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. It's about offering yourself to God, seeking to be obedient to his call, saying yes to him, regardless of the same voices all around crying out, no, you must be mad. It's about how, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German Lutheran pastor and fierce opponent of the Nazis, once said, when God calls a person, he bids them come and die. It's about dying to self, and that is about love. Love for God and love for each other. Jesus said, you have to hate your family. You have to take up your cross. Oh, and you have to give up all your possessions. Again, we think surely just Jesus doesn't mean this. Surely he means just be less materialistic. Come to church instead of washing the car. Don't hoard up for yourself too many nice things. Or if you do, just feel a bit guilty sometimes. But Jesus said you have to give up all your possessions. And that is precisely what the first Christians did. They sold everything they had and they pooled all their money. Imagine asking people to do that today. Certainly, Jesus means that we have to stop possessing things, but see ourselves rather as holding them in trust. Nothing is ultimately ours. Everything is God's. And even the collection or donation of money to the church is simply giving back to God what is rightfully his. But maybe one of the things that will characterize the next few years is a change in our attitude to material wealth. The 20th century put the individual at the center of their own world, and we have seen the pursuit of our own happiness as an unalienable right, no matter what the consequences are for others. But times, they are changing. We all may have to live more frugally, not maintaining every room in our house at a constant ambient temperature, not driving around in petrol-guzzling SUVs, not jetting around the world on holiday, but giving some of these things up because we can't afford to keep living the way that we have. And I don't just mean that monetary inflation is causing us to draw back. No, we cannot afford the cost in terms of climate change, global warming, rising sea levels, severe weather events, drought, flooding, forest fires. We just can't go on like this. And that means giving up the right to own things, to use things, to consume things. There's no doubt about it. Jesus said you have to hate your family. You have to carry your cross. And you have to give up all your possessions, and then you can come and follow him. And we mustn't water down these demands, because one thing is certainly true. Even though we may do a lot for God, we may have given up many things, there is still more that we can do. Even those of us who are ordained, who have offered ourselves sacrificially to God and to his church, need to go on giving ourselves to him, offering all that we are and all that we have to God's pleasure and disposal. But what does that look like in practice? For some of us, it might mean that we commit ourselves to coming to church more frequently and not missing out because of other commitments. I don't say that just to keep the numbers up. It's just that if you want to be more committed in your Christian life, then you are going to need the support of those around you at church. you're going to need to come to church. For some of us, the more that we can do might be that we're bold enough to share our faith with someone else. One easy way that we can do this is to approach people that we know who don't come to church and invite them to something like the harvest service, or Remembrance Day, or the Christmas services. Or it might be for us to pray a prayer in which we offer ourselves fully afresh to God. Each day, pray in the morning that God will guide you, that you may be able to give more of yourself in loving service to Him. Just try it and see where God takes you. Following Jesus should be a life-consuming adventure, not a dull but worthy exercise or a part-time leisure interest. I ended up hearing God's call to ordained ministry because I prayed a prayer that said to God that I will do whatever He wants, as long as I know what it is. It's about saying yes to God, yes to His invitation to follow Him, yes to the challenges that are involved in living for Him, yes to putting God first. Amen.